So today you're going to be hearing from Vanessa about the topic of loving with limits, effective guidance and discipline strategies. Vanessa has been a teacher at the A. Sophie Rogers School for 8 years, and she also worked at a therapeutic preschool for 3 years prior to that. She has a master's in social work from The Ohio State University and a master's in applied developmental psychology from the University of Pittsburgh. We're thrilled to have her here today to offer information to you on this important topic and to answer your questions. So now I'm going to attempt to share our slideshow for today. Give me a nod if you can see the slides and they look good. All right, thanks a lot, guys. And I think we can just take it away, Vanessa.
Hey, thanks for joining us today. Thinking about our outline for today, that we're just going to start with some proactive strategies, things that you can do ahead of time, thinking about routine, appropriate expectations, consistency, and then some reactive strategies. Once your child is kind of in it to win it behavior, some things that you can do to kind of de-escalate and get them back on track. Before we wrap up, thinking about, I want you to leave today having a plan. The next time this happens, that might be at the end of the day when you pick your child up from school. And then just at the end, knowing that you're not alone. I left my kids going to lunch and they wanted to know where I was going. And I said, well, I'm actually going to go talk to some moms and dads about, some challenging behaviors about friends not listening and throwing tantrums. And meanwhile, out of my class, I had 2 kids on the floor screaming, some kids on top of a table. And I'm like, and I don't feel so successful right now. So just knowing that you're not alone in this, and this is just part of childhood, and it's doing your best every day of the time, and ending with some questions, so that we're going to try to keep just the talking part of this brief, because the dialogue and the back and forth brainstorming is really what we want to try to focus on today.
All right, so our goal is not necessarily to eliminate fears and feelings. All kids and adults really do have fears and feelings, but to really feel more confident and secure in our choices related to discipline and setting limits for our kids, and also to give us some hope and structure when we have some hard times with our kids.
Oh, as we get started, loving with limits. Routines are incredibly important for children, that children really thrive on predictability and routine, that children need to know what is expected of them, that as children's brains are developing, having something to know to look forward to, they like pleasing adults. They don't like making you upset. And they truly do have very little control over their days, that our schedule dictates so much of what children do throughout the day. And that when they have the expectation of knowing, okay, when you wake up, I need you to get your shoes on and meet me by the door, they'd rather get that smile from you than getting yelled at, get your shoes on 10 times. So that the more that they know what's coming, the more that they have that routine, that they have that predictability, it just sets them up for success. And I think that it's more important to have an order of things versus a strict time of things, because unavoidably, no one has a strict time that, at 8 o'clock we're out the door, at 8:10 we're on the freeway, at 8:15 I drop you off at school, and 8:20 I'm sitting down and answering my first email, because, maybe there's a knot in a shoe, or maybe that cup of coffee gets spilled, that things happen and that's unavoidable. And we teach children how to deal with those problems. But if you have an order, that helps them set up that. We use a lot of when then language as to when you get your shoes on, then we can leave and go to the park, or when you lay down, then I can read you a book. But I spoke about that their brains are developing, that their prefrontal cortex, this part that's up there in front of your brain, is called your executive functioning. And it is truthfully not fully developed until you are 26. So when we say that children, middle schoolers, adolescents are impulsive, they don't have cause and effect. They truly don't. A lot of adults sometimes don't even have it. But when we're giving them these skills to help to try to develop those things, routines and predictability really help them start to learn that cause and effect earlier on. And this is just something that's super simple, that helps them set them up for success, and hopefully helps make your life a little bit simpler too. Something that we use with parents, and also that you probably have at your children's school, is a visual schedule. Like Andy mentioned, his daughter is pre-reading right now. Andy, she was not one of the ones laying on the ground screaming. She was in line ready to go to lunch. But she's pre-reading, so a word schedule isn't going to be successful for her, and we will get to having developmentally appropriate expectations. But having a visual schedule, having shoes, having a coat, and then having meet me at the front door, those things are okay to have, so that you're making those things successful for children, but they're just little add-on things that can make your day, make your routines, make your transitions, which I know a lot of you said were challenging, a little bit easier. Setting up appropriate expectations. We want to make sure that when we are setting expectations for children, that we are setting them up for success with attainable limits, and that we are avoiding power struggles. Nobody needs to be arguing with a 5-year-old, because I think we all know that they will fight you to the core, and that they will be on the ground with their feet crisscrossed, and that they're in it to win it, and they are seeing red, and that's all they want. So that when you're setting that limit, make sure it's something that you can follow through with. That if you're saying, well, I guess you're never going to have this, make sure that that's something that you can follow through with. Making sure that the limit is attainable. It's something that you truly can do. We're talking about toileting, sleeping, and eating. Developmentally appropriate thinking about your child's age. If your child is 2 and you're trying to potty train, that's probably not developmentally appropriate, and you're setting up a power struggle for you and for a child that doesn't need to be there. Thinking about eating. Using a fork for a 5, 6, 7-year-old, yes, their fine motor is developed, they're ready for those things, but expecting that of a 2-year-old probably isn't. So knowing your child's age and knowing your child's limits and expectations are really, really helpful and not helpful. When you're giving those limits and expectations, we talk a lot about direct versus indirect commands. An indirect command would be, oh, I think it's almost time to get out the door. Would you like to go eat dinner? Those aren't options. So that when you're giving that command, it needs to be, I need you to meet me at the door in 2 minutes, or put on your shoes, or it's time for bed. There are times for choices, and we'll get to that in a second. But when you're giving limits and when you're giving directions that aren't expectations, that they're things that need to happen here and now, that they need to be commands. And that does sound like a harsh word, but they need to be directions. They need to be expectations that are phrased in a manner that they aren't a question, they aren't wishy-washy, but they're very direct, and that they let a child know what you're expecting of them in that moment. And then reduce, no, don't, and stop, and then tell a child what you want them to do. I hear a lot of people saying stop, but then there's not a follow-up question or not a follow-up statement with what you expect from a child. That I worked with a family that their living room was set up as an amazing race course, that everything was in the middle of the room, and there was a circle, and the child would run, and he would run, and he would run all day long. And the mom would yell, stop, and the little guy would stop, and he would throw his hands up, and he'd stand there, and he'd count to 10. That was a coping skill we had worked on. And then he'd start running again, because there was never any follow-up as to what she needed him to do. She needed him to walk, and she needed him to sit down and play a game or read a book. So instead of yelling, stop running, it would be, I need you to walk, and I need you to sit down on the couch. So instead of yelling, no, don't stop, there are absolutely times and places for that. If something is unsafe, or if you need a child's direct attention, if a child is on top of a roof had climbed there from their playhouse, absolutely you're going to yell, no, don't, or stop. But that their needs, you want to make sure that you tell a child what you expect from them, not just telling them to stop a behavior. Thinking about waiting time, that we're all busy, whether we're making dinner, whether we're finishing a phone call, whether we're finishing a meeting. Children wait. They wait for us all day long. And making sure that what we're expecting from them is appropriate. That oftentimes you kind of hear that their age is approximation of what they can wait. If they're 2, they can wait 2 minutes. If they're 5, they can wait 5 minutes. But when you're expecting them to wait, make sure that there is something for them to wait with, whether that's a book, a toy. iPads are options. They shouldn't be that only option. But they will find something to do for those 2 minutes. And I think we all know that if they aren't given something to fill those few minutes with. Thinking about those expectations you are giving, if you give an 11-year-old a 5-step direction, their cognitive brain, they can follow through with that direction. But if you're giving a 3-year-old a very complex direction and they need you to go get your shoes, they need you to put your shoes on, put your coat on, get your book and meet me by the door, I probably can't function that direction at 7 a.m. before coffee. But a 5-year-old heading to kindergarten, when we send kids, we have kids 3 through 5, we have mixed age groups classrooms. Sending a child to kindergarten at 5, we expect a child to follow a 3-step direction. So I can say, I need you to brush your teeth, get your shirt on, get your backpack, and meet me by the door. Those are 3 things a 5-year-old should be able to do. But if you're telling your 2 or 3-year-old that probably isn't an appropriate expectation for your kiddo. And the last of appropriate expectations is thinking about offering choices. Like I said, that children really do have little choice in their day, and oftentimes our schedule and our needs dictate a lot of their days. Giving them appropriate choices. We are still masked in our school, and that I heard a mom. There was a power struggle in the lobby in the morning that the mom was just kind of frantically handing a kid a mask when she had a handful of them in her hand, and she needed to get out the door. She needed to get to work. I know exactly what was happening, but she handed him a mask and he had a meltdown. It wasn't the mask she wanted. It wasn't the mask he wanted. A simple, hey, there's a shark and there's an alligator. Which one do you want? Would have reduced that tantrum. But she was in a rush. No one's at fault in that situation. It's something that we all do. And that children can't be offered choices. Like, it's not always an option. But offering choices when you do have the time and when it is appropriate reduces some of those power struggles for when you are in those quick second snap decisions. Offering them, when you're sitting down to meal, do you want the red plate? Do you want the blue plate? Do you want 2 books? Do you want 3 books? That children can read books. That's awesome. But it's okay to set those limits so that they're still within appropriate expectations that you're still setting. Consistency. Consistency is challenging. It's hard. It truly is hard. But it is probably one of the most important things that we will talk about today, is that once you set a limit, you need to follow through with it. Even when it is maybe an hour later, following through the limit is really, really important because children learn that limits can be tested. And if you do not follow through with that limit, you will believe that they will come back and they will push, and they know, oh, mom didn't make me follow through that one time. Let me try the next 5 times to see if she's gonna make me try it. I do not like equating children to animals, but it's strict behavioralism. If you think of Pavlov's dogs, thinking about begging, that if you want to reinforce a behavior, it's called intermittent reinforcement, that you reinforce a behavior once, but you may not do it the next 2 or 3 times. It will increase the behavior. So just making sure that you're following through the best that you can. And then not getting too deep into psychology, but just thinking about that when children are angry and upset, that they go from their thinking brain to their survival brain, from their front of their brain to their brain stem. And they truly are in fight, flight, or freeze mode, that they are, I equate it to like the Peanuts teacher, that they don't hear your directions. They don't hear you talking. They hear wah, 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 and directions you're giving, they're not hearing. So you have to give them time and space to come back down. We're all guilty of needing to be out the door, needing a kid to be in bed, needing a kid to be in bath, but giving them time and space to calm down, to be able to reason and talk to you again. But just making sure that we get upset just like kids do. I'm sorry, kind of jumping forward, these all kind of, this isn't necessarily one thing or the next, they all kind of bleed into the other. But a child does need, time and space to calm down, just like how we get upset. I know that after I'm upset, I might need a drink of water, I might need a hug. After a child is in full tantrum meltdown mode, your nose is running, you might need tissues. Making sure that you're taking care of those basic needs before you're coming back and problem solving and revisiting the situation. That once kids have come down from that tantrum, from that curve, or even from just setting their foot down and not budging, making sure that you're revisiting later and talking through whether it's you and your child or as a family, how you can fix the situation and how you can make sure that everyone is safer at a later time. Because most of the time, when they're not in that win it to that I'm going to win this argument and I don't care what you say, that usually they can talk through with you and come up with some pretty good solutions on how they can make that bedtime routine or another time of the day better. So kind of wrapping up quickly, I'm sorry, usually we could talk all day on this, but just thinking about that challenging time of your day, making a plan about how to be proactive, thinking about how you can develop a routine, how you can develop consistency better, but also then how to be reactive better, how you can think about giving your child a little bit more space, a little bit more time, but making sure that follow through. And just a takeaway message, take a deep breath. You are not in this alone. You need it. Take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. And most importantly, that children display challenging behavior. They're new to this world. If you think about a 3-year-old, they have been in this world for 36 months. And that is a very short period of time, and they're testing limits. They're exerting power, and they truly are just learning how to be a kid. They're learning how this world works and how challenging it is for us. I'm concerned when a child isn't testing limits and they aren't showing these challenging behaviors, because it means they aren't learning and they aren't figuring out who they are. So while it's hard, you aren't in this alone. Your family, your friends, your child's teachers are here. And if it truly is a concern, pediatricians have resources for further questions and further resources. So thank you so much for your time today. And I do have a few additional minutes as well if there are questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I think that there were maybe a couple questions that came through, so we can take a look at those in a minute. You're also welcome to just unmute and ask a question to Vanessa at this point. And if we don't get to some of your questions from the chat, we can also post them on the RealTalk website when we post the recording and slides and resources. Just to note, if you didn't notice in the chat box, I posted a link to a positive behavior chart that you can use at home. It's just a template, I think it's in a Word document, so you can make it your own, add a sticker chart area for yourself. But it's just an example of a visual chart you can use at home to support positive behavior. And then the second link I put in the chat was a link to learn more about positive behavioral interventions and supports, which is what all Ohio schools should be starting to use if they haven't been already for a while now. It's sort of a framework for supporting positive behavior in schools. So that might be something to ask your child's school about or look out for as they get a little bit older and into sort of the pre-K to 12 system.